Hey, what's up everybody? It is Kellen here from Start Your Systems again, and welcome to another track gameplay here in MX Simulator, where today we are playing Thunder Valley 2017, the Race Factor Gaming track created by the RF Track crew. And this is the third installment of this one, where I'm basically talking about real-life motocross through most of this video. The AMA Nationals, of course, where I discuss my thoughts and opinions on what's happening. We also get a little more up-close preview of this week's track with me. I'm not the best right now, definitely not as comfortable in this game as I once was, so please don't look at this and be like, wow, this guy's going to be hauling some tail. I will be going decently fast sometimes, but most of the time I'll end up crashing. So please bear with me on that. I've also never played this track, so I don't have any real clue what a good line is. And before I dive into real life stuff, just wanted to touch on one subject which I've had a lot of questions about. This setup that I'm using for this outdoor gameplay series, whatever you want to call it, is still my Supercross setup that I did a video on maybe a couple months ago. So I haven't changed anything just yet. I think at some point I will try to put together like an updated suspension tutorial, but even so, I'm not one to usually like change my setup a whole lot, so you might not see it change a bunch. And the reason for that basically is because I like getting comfortable with a certain feel of the bike, and once I know how it's going to react in certain situations, I don't particularly like changing it too much. Obviously, when it comes to suspension plushness and stuff like that, it's okay to change it around a little bit, but my advanced won't change pretty much at all, and most of the other pertinent stuff in your suspension stuff probably won't change up that much either. Only things that are small here or there, but again, still running my SX setup, so hopefully that answers some questions for you guys. I know there was a lot of questions about my setup and what exactly I'm doing, and that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm still running the same thing. So let's jump into real life, shall we, this week? Lakewood, Colorado, Thunder Valley National. Pretty popular track on the calendar, I feel like, for most people. It is a little bit of a tougher track given the altitude. It's located, this is a rough estimate, but I know it's at least a mile above sea level, so I would care to wager in about the 6,600 feet range. I could be completely wrong, but that's my guess. So it's not like way up there in terms of some of the highest mountaintops or whatever, but the higher you go from the elevation that you're not normally used to, the tougher it gets. And this usually seems to bite Jason Anderson the most lately for some reason. He's had really bad altitude sickness. Did not finish the first moto here last year and did not start the second moto because he was already on a plane home because he couldn't handle the altitude. And then this year at the Salt Lake City Supercross, he got in very late, I think early in the morning of the race day, and then was on a plane home not an hour after the night show was over. So he's doing what he can to cope with that altitude sickness problem, but as I mentioned, it does seem to somewhat affect him the most. But this track pretty much is a Tomac track all the way home. Obviously, it is the track where he had his vicious crash 2 years ago that ended his magnificent 2015 season, where he was pretty much just slaying everybody. So maybe some bad memories here for him, but otherwise he is a Colorado native, lives in the state of Colorado still, so this is a home track, home field advantage, whatever you want to call it, for him, and I'm sure that he's looking forward to using that advantage, if you'd like to call it that, as an advantage. But yeah, usually he's been pretty good here in the past. I expect much of the same this weekend, and spoiler alert for those of you that have not watched the Glen Helen National yet, he needs a rebound week, does Eli Tomac. That was not really the ideal scenario for him to open the season. I bet if you asked 100 motocross fans who would be leading the points after 2 rounds, one might say Marvin Musquin, but the other 99 would say Tomac. So that one fan probably should go buy a lottery ticket, because now Musquin is leading the points. by 15 points because he won outright the first moto at Glen Helen. And just to talk about that first moto for a second, Tomac didn't really look way better than Marvin. He looked better, but he didn't look like, oh my god, Eli Tomac is an animal. He's just gonna ride through these guys in the second moto. That was just like a fluke win for Marvin, because I was checking lap times and checking distance times between each other, and once the gaps got settled to a point where Tomac could push to his normal lap time pace, he's about 15 seconds back of Marvin because he started outside of the top 10 and was weaving his way through, and Marvin did get the whole shot, so obviously clean air helps. But by the time Tomac got to second, which was only a couple laps before the finish, Marvin was still 11 seconds ahead of Tomac. So Tomac really only gained about 4 seconds on track on Marvin while he was eating alive all the other competitors. And to be honest, that's exactly what he was doing. He just would suddenly swallow up either a group of riders or just one rider that was by himself and make it look pretty easy to pass them too. Like, he didn't waste much time. So I had a feeling if he got to Marvin, the same thing would have happened. But I was trying to calculate the gaps that first moto. I was just like, I don't think that with the time remaining he was going to make it. And then I knew once he got into second, there was no chance. I mean, time was almost expired and Marvin had a comfortable lead. And then on the last lap, Marvin really slowed it down and won by about 6 seconds. So it looks a little bit different on paper, but he definitely had that race kind of handled, got the whole shot, checked out early, and managed the gap from the front. So I wasn't really impressed with Tomac. I felt like he, for someone that we expected to be balls out dominant outdoors, coming off of that Supercross season, I was a little bit like, wow, that was, Tomac was definitely the best rider on the track, but it wasn't like he was blowing Marvin's times away, blowing everybody else just completely away. He was just kind of an average guy pushing through the field really well, making consistent passes, and I almost was thinking maybe that's his end goal. Maybe he just is looking championship picture, knows he got a bad start. Marvin started way up front, thought maybe he wasn't going to get him, so he just kind of settled in and realized once he got to second, that's all I'm going to get. And kudos to him, good for him to settle it down instead of push too hard like he has in the past. So maybe that's what he did. I'm not going to speculate, but that's just one of the possibilities of what happened there. But Marvin killed it that first moto. I mean, you have to give him credit. On to the second moto, though. Marvin starts decently, but not up front this time. And first lap's coming through, and Tomac's kind of buried a little bit. I'm looking through the field. He's in 15th. And I couldn't see this because I was at the race. I couldn't see this from where I was standing, but I heard the announcers yelling, Josh Grant down, Josh Grant down. And I didn't see it, but then suddenly I see Tomac kind of funneling off the side of the track, and then he got stuck. And I was like, did the announcers get it wrong? And excuse me, Tomac was actually the one down? I was a little confused. And then I quickly learned that no, Grant actually had fallen. And people around me at the track were basically saying oh, Grant got up and just rode sideways into Tomac, and it bent his front brake. And I was trying to think about that, because the corner he crashed in didn't make sense for that. His front brake is on the opposite side. And I was like, I don't think that happens. But we're watching Tomac struggle his way back to the pits with clearly a front disc brake problem. And it's locking up, something weird's going on. And he was still maybe 6 corners away from the mechanics area when this all started happening, so he had a long ways to go. And finally got back to the mechanics area, and I thought when he got there, I was like, man, unless they do something quick, he's kind of done here. He's going to be way too far back to get to 20th, because he was already really far back. He was going to go a lap down real quick. And excuse me. And I watched the stream playback just to be sure that my hunch was a reality, but I thought that it took Tomac kind of an unusually long amount of time to, get in and out of the mechanics area, because the same thing happened to him in Dallas this year, where front brake locked up, he crashed, rolled it into the pits, mechanics farted around with the disc brake housing and then with the front brake housing on the handlebar and realized they couldn't do anything, so they clipped the front brake cord. so he didn't have any front brake fluid going to the disc anymore, or to the pads. So the pads release, the disc is able to go free, and he just rides the rest of the race without a front brake, which when you're Eli Tomac, you can still make passes. And that's exactly what they ended up doing this race too. They really tooled around with that bike, trying to figure out what was wrong, and eventually, I'm pretty sure, like 95% sure, they just cut the front brake line, because even if they didn't do that, he did not race the rest of the race with a front brake. So if they're trying to fix it, it didn't matter. And I was so confused by that, because they had the same problem this year already, so why wouldn't they just go to the one solution that worked the first time, that was the only solution they had, instead of try to fix something, unless they came up with like a fail-safe thing that they could use for the next time that it happened, and they were trying that. But I was really watching them, and it just looked like they were trying to like mess with the the calipers around it, and to try to get them to break free. And I was like, unless the front brake is seized and it's just completely locked, which it wasn't, because he was still able to roll it back to the pits, then the second you cut the front brake line, any fluid power that goes to the brake releases those rubber caliper clamps, and the front brake is free. And Tomac, obviously that sucks that Glen Helen have to ride without a front brake, but he ended up doing it anyway. So I was a little bit confused. It wasted some time, and in the end I felt like it was kind of a big deal, because Tomac ended up a lap down, and like kind of a long ways a lap down. Like he ended up coming out in like 15th a lap down, so obviously he was like 35th or 36th, but I meant like in terms of on-track positions, he was in about 15th, so he got back on track where he was, but a lap down. And I was kind of amazed, because he actually passed a couple of the guys without a front brake on Glen Helen, which is arguably the track you might need the front brake the most of any track. And he, maybe with like 10 minutes to go, I remember looking at my phone and seeing what the time was, and he was still in 30th place, and I'm just like, man, valiant effort. I give him kudos for going back out to this track with no front brake and trying, but I felt like it was a lost cause that he wasn't going to get any points. And then like a bunch of riders just started quitting mid-moto. Maybe some had mechanicals. The track was pretty rough, so I could understand some fatigue, but just outright quitting, I don't know. So a lot of guys DNF'd, and Tomac suddenly was like thrust into 22nd with like a couple laps to go. Ended up making a few passes, got into 19th, finished 19th, and those 2 points could be pretty critical come down to the end of the line here. Now Muscan went and got third in that second moto, so he went 1-3 on the day. Didn't really take advantage of that situation, because someone in Muscan's position should go win the second moto to get max points, obviously, which he did not do. But he admitted that he was kind of just playing it safe. The track was pretty gnarly. Anderson and Baggett were flying ahead of him, and Anderson ended up winning his first ever moto. So it was just like a complete weird crapshoot race. Tomac finishing 19th. Muscan now leads the points going into Colorado this week. And I still think Tomac is plenty comfortable and fine, but if at any point it comes back that if they would have just cut the front brake line right away, and it haunts them that they didn't do that, and Kawasaki's going to be kicking themselves for basically having the same mechanical failure twice in a year that may or may not have cost Eli Tomac now 2 titles. I don't think it will. I think he's perfectly fine. He's only 15 points down, and there's 20 motos to go. So I'm not, there's no panic button or anything like that. I think Tomac's fine. But just speculation-wise, man, if that comes back to bite him, whew, Kawasaki's got some talking to do with their brake supplier, which I believe is Brembo, but I could be wrong. I don't want to throw any brake companies under the bus. So that's 450s. And what to look out for, I don't really know. Tomac's probably going to be fired up and go win both motos. Muscan's been good at Colorado in the past, but I don't know. Josh Grant's usually pretty good here, but he looked pretty bad the second moto at Glen Helen, so hopefully he kind of figures out what was going wrong there. He had a third the first moto, so obviously the speed's still there. And Jason Anderson could be a non-factor because of altitude sickness, and then Blake Baggett has been decent, and then suddenly great in that second moto at Glen Helen. So we're trying to see who the real Blake Baggett is going into Lakewood, and maybe he'll show his face, and maybe we'll see some other guys running up front. Not really sure. But as for 250 class, if you thought the 450 class was crazy, man oh man did the 250 class get like even more flipped upside down. PC Cowie, 3 engine failures, 2 in the first moto with Hill and Faulkner, and then 1 in the second moto with Savachi, or no, somebody. Trying to think who had an engine failure. AC went perfect through the weekend. He did not have an engine failure, but those PC Cowies had a rough weekend and not too good. AC did move to second into points though, even though he had a somewhat mediocre day. Did not hit the podium overall again. Overalls were all over the place, as a 4-2 out of Zach Osborne won the overall, and then behind that was Jeremy Martin going 1-7. Martin actually probably was going to go 1-1. Whole shot the first moto, checked out. Whole shot the second moto, then crashed all by himself with the lead about a half lap in. Blamed it on overwatering of the track. And just to see the replay of his crash, it does look like he pushed a little bit too hard in one section on the opening lap, lost the rear. It caught. He slid back across the track and then just went right through the banners and down. And came from the back to 7th, so that was an impressive ride. He almost got, I want to say it was Faulkner he was on for 6th. It was really close. But yeah, Faulkner stepped it up and he held on. So J-Mart won 7. And then Dylan Ferrandis, who, as I mentioned in Supercross, this kid's going to rail. Like, he is going to have some motos where you're going to be like, this is the greatest 250 rider on the track. Nobody was going to stop him, whatever, and that's exactly what happened in Moto2 at Glen Helen. And I'm a little bit shocked that it happened as quickly as it did and the way it did too, because he had a concussion last week in Hangtown, hit the ground pretty hard, only rode a couple times during the week, and then really kind of struggled to that 9th place finish in the first moto. Didn't look like he was like killing anybody by any stretch of the imagination. So to come out in the second moto and kind of get gifted the lead when Martin went down, but then have pressure from Osborne for the first couple laps and then just absolutely drop Zacho was impressive. Like, I was really impressed that Ferrandis had that in him this early in the season, and he looked extremely comfortable pushing that pace too. I mean, he just walked away from Osborne, I think greater than 20 seconds by the end of it, to win that second moto, and he was just cruising. Like, it didn't look like he was really riding over his head. I didn't see any mistakes. Just looked comfortable, so I was impressed. And that's coming from someone who knows that Ferrandis is capable of stuff like that. I was still impressed by that ride, so kudos to him. He went 9-1 to get 3rd overall, so that's how all over the place these overalls were. And as mentioned, Osborne with the overall this weekend continues his points lead. His points lead is stretched out now. He's 21 points up on Adam C. and Cerullo. But even with a DNF in the first moto last week, Jeremy Martin now pulls to 31 points back of Osborne, even though he was less than that leaving Hangtown. But still, 31 points is doable for the two-time champ, and obviously it doesn't look like Osborne is just the complete dominant rider, or at least Glen Helen didn't look like that. So we'll have to see going into Lakewood. Not really sure who to expect to do well this weekend. Never really seen a large sample size of this track for either rider. I mean, I know that Martin has won here before, but you know, new team, new bike. The altitude could be a whole different story. I know those Star Racing bikes are great on horsepower, and they probably don't lose a lot of horsepower by going into the altitude, so I'm sure they've got the jetting figured out on that, and got some great engine mapping and stuff like that. But excuse me, I'm not really sure. I mean, based off of Glen Helen, all I know is that this 250 class is wild and up in the air. Like, everybody that finished near the front in Moto 1, barring Zach Osborne, had a kind of rough second moto, and everybody who finished a little bit of ways from the front in the first moto had a pretty great second moto. You know, it was a shuffleboard, it seemed like. Like AC, for example, you know, he went down in the first couple corners in the first moto, charged from pretty much dead last to 7th, I want to say, and then finished 3rd in the second moto. So he just missed the podium overall, but you know, a ride like that from AC shows that his speed's there. He's consistent in some aspect because he rode through the field to get a 7th, and then he rode in the field, or you know, from a good start to get a 3rd. So positive signs for AC, but it's just such a topsy-turvy class. Like Savatgy, first moto looked great. Finally looked like he had found kind of his old mojo. I mean, Martin did get away from him at the end, but they both gapped everybody by a long ways. So yeah, just a lot of interesting points in this 250 class. I mean, there's so many things that you could say could happen this weekend, but I don't feel like any of them are realistic or anything like that until the gate drops, because I really don't know what's going to happen in this 250 class. So I'm not going to pick a winner in either class this weekend because it's been so up in the air. I mean, I would assume Tomac is going to win in the 450 class, but I mean, we all saw how upside down it gets turned. His starts have been blah, and not much more to say other than blah. Like they have not been good, and his teammate has pretty much outstarted him every race now. And the fact that Muscan is his main competitor and Muscan's getting great starts every moto doesn't help the case, because Muscan starts up front and can kind of settle into a pace where Tomac has to ride his balls out, and that sets up a lot more opportunities for crashes or mistakes or something. So, you know, a lot could happen. Who knows? 2 motos in and Muscan, or 2 races in and Muscan leading the points by 15 points is something, like I said, that not many people thought would happen. Osborne leading by 21 is kind of something I think kind of most people expected could happen, but not the way that it happened. Like they thought, yeah, Osborne goes out, dominates the first 2 rounds. There's some shuffling going on behind him, so he ends up with a 20-point lead, whatever. But not gets a 4-2 at Glen Helen and still extends his points lead by a lot. So a lot of things to play this weekend. Lakewood is a very interesting track. I'm very interested in watching it play out this weekend again. I know my riding has been absolutely abysmal in this video. I'm going to start working on some sim setups this week and try to get some figured out, so when I play these, it's not just all bad. Definitely gotten rusty since I've stopped racing. Now I'm not racing in the Race Factory Gaming Competition anymore since I'm streaming them, and just got to try to figure out what I'm doing, because outdoors is usually my specialty. I'm usually a little bit better at it, so I'll figure it out, and I'll be sure to show you guys my setup and show you what I figured out so you too can figure it out with me. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, the usual. Download the track in the description below. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, I'd love to bench race with you in the comment section below. Any thoughts or opinions you have to add to my sentiments about this weekend's racing or last weekend's action or anything along those lines, be sure to let me know. And yeah, hope to see you guys in our future videos. Thanks for watching another gameplay video in MX Simulator from Lakewood, and we'll see you guys in the next one.